Hood Canal Communications and MasonWebTV.com present 2016 general election candidates video sit-downs. Here is Diedrich Allen with candidate for 35th District State Representative Position 2, Craig Patti.
Okay, Craig, thanks first for providing the venue for this interview and taking some time to do this. First, tell everyone who you are, talk about your background and why you're running.
Yeah, I guess first off, thanks, Diedrich, for allowing this opportunity. First and foremost, I'm a husband and father. I've been married for 12 years to my wife, Katie. We have two awesome kids, my daughter Nora, who's 10, and my son Kellen, who's 8. We've lived up in Allen here in March, it'll be 10 years. Personally, I'm a lifelong resident of the 35th District. I was born and raised in the Thurston County portion, living now in the Mason County portion, and I work in Kitsap County. So I really feel that brings a very unique perspective to this district, which is very diverse. You know, 3 counties that really have very different identities, different needs, so on and so forth. And I believe having that background really helps. By trade, I'm a firefighter. I'm a second-generation firefighter. My dad has been a firefighter for well over 40 years, and my brother and I followed in his footsteps. I started my career almost 15 years ago in the Steamboat Island area, and almost 11 years ago, the city of Bremerton. Had an opportunity, came up here, and been here ever since and love it. I was on the school board up in North Mason for about a year and a half. Kind of filling an unexpired term, and we had some great successes there, including the bond which built a new high school and is rebuilding middle school and so on and so forth. So with my background, as well as my experiences with being on a school board, my service as a firefighter, I bring a unique perspective and really a first-hand perspective to some of the big issues that are facing the state: education funding, mental health funding, which has now come to the forefront since we've been found to be contempt in our obligations there. So bringing that front row, street knowledge and experience to Olympia, I think is invaluable, and something that isn't very well demonstrated now in Olympia. So that's the big reason why I'm running. It was a hard decision. It's obviously a big time commitment, and I have 2 kids. My wife and I have one chance to raise good kids, and we know that. And so this is, we've always felt anything that takes time away from the family better be worth it. And I believe this to be worth it. We're trying to teach our children if you want to make a change, if you want to see something happen, you have to be willing to put yourself out there. And so not only is this an opportunity to serve the district in general, of which I've called home my entire life, it's also a good opportunity to demonstrate to my children that we walk the talk, and your actions are always more important than your words.
Okay, I've noticed that you're running as an independent Democrat. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? Well, for me,
this is my first time running for office. I actually had attempted to run to stay on the school board, and then I found out I lived on the wrong side of the street, so I couldn't continue the service there. I think, like most people, I can't be pigeonholed into one or the other, especially in our 2-party system. I know there's a lot of frustration with it, and it really is. It seems my perspective, whether it's just the way society is, you're one or the other, and I just don't believe it. I think issues are so complex. It's impossible to say you're a liberal or a conservative, you're a Democrat or a Republican. I think issues are more complex than that, and I think people are a lot smarter than that. There's several issues depending on what you look at. I say I kind of have different leanings on different issues. It really depends on the topic. If you were to take the both party aspects, and this has been asked a lot, what does an independent mean? Well, I think if you put together the most what people are familiar with, the Republican Democrat Party, and you look at the foundations of which those parties are based on, and especially of recently in the last 10, 15 years, I really lean towards the Democratic side. Okay. When it comes to money, fiscal issues, I consider myself fairly conservative. I believe you spend wisely and you save for a rainy day. But at the same time, on the other hand of it, there are services that are demanded of us and that we need to provide. And the only way to do that is to properly fund those services. So that is why I'm running as an independent Democrat.
Okay. So your top issues are education, public safety, and leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about each of them, starting with education.
Okay.
If elected, how would you plan to make sure our schools receive the funding they need?
That issue is basically the whole McCleary decision. You know, and the McCleary decision was based off of what the legislature identified as basic funding, and that they weren't funding that those requirements. When I came on the school board, it was 2012. It was kind of right in that time that McCleary was being decided and what was going to be needed, and it takes a lot of money. You know, the number that was floated around most often. There's a few different outliers, but $8 billion in addition to what was currently being spent. How you do that is, and it's a value statement the state of Washington needs to make, and as a representative of the 35th District, we need to have our voice heard, is the state has the highest number of tax exemptions in the country, 655. And every 2 years, it equates to about $30 billion. So what are our values as a state? Is providing education, which is in our Constitution, is that more important than giving these tax breaks? I look at that as money that is those are taxes that are on the books. That's money that we as citizens are giving away that we could be used to fund necessary services. So for me, that's first and foremost. I believe that we need to tackle those. And see, you know, I'm sure there's exemptions out there. 655. I would be hard pressed to say there are not exemptions out there that don't benefit us. But you know, when you're talking about exemptions that were created in the late 40s, early 50s, that were designed for one thing but are now doing something completely different, I don't think that's serving their purpose anymore. So that's where I would go, is to go for those, and to ensure that our schools still have the ability to make their own local decisions, as well as to give them the pathway to decide if they want local enhancements, to have an avenue to do that. When it comes to public safety, obviously with my background, my career, working within the system, you see the holes and the gaps. It plays into mental health. You know, a lot of resources are expended, you know, drug addiction, crime, homelessness. All of these can be classified as a public safety issue, but a lot of them, when you circle back at the root cause, is mental health. So I really believe that we need to focus on that and take that approach of, you know, treating drug addiction as less as a crime and more of a public health issue. Realizing that instead of trying to fight the actions, we need to focus on the root cause. The other side of it too is, you know, as a state, are we prepared for a major disaster? We just had a major exercise this year, Cascadia Rising. Obviously, earthquake potential is well known in the state. But I go back to our wildfire responses that we've had the last 2 years especially. And in 2015, which was the worst wildfire season in history, it was predicted. In my line of work, we have a saying, if it's predictable, it's preventable. And the legislature was well warned, and there were asks made. You know, we need the funding to be able to up our staffing to be able to fight this, and the legislature basically gave half of the request. And the end result being that we are looking at pulling people off the street to give them certifications for wildland firefighting. They normally take about 40 hours, and we're going to give them in 3. And so we're just increasing our liability and our risk. And for what? Because we decided we wanted to save a few pennies here, and now we're paying more on the back end in recovery. So I think what it comes down to in that is doing the right thing, and you know, you pay now, you're going to pay later. And usually when we pay later, it's a lot more expensive. So the ounce of prevention is worth more than a gallon of cure. And then leadership aspect, which is it's a big thing for me. Accountability is one of the top human traits that I value. And I get frustrated when I see legislative updates and I see finger pointing. I see blame game. I don't see responsibility for going into extra sessions. I see blame being cast. As for reasons why something did or didn't happen, it's never my fault,
Right.
which I don't buy. I think when you are elected representative, the buck stops with you. Whether or not you're on the majority side or not, that we don't elect people to office because of their party. We elect them because we feel that they are going to represent us and that they are going to do a job. And if you're not accountable to do that, nothing gets done. So for me, leadership, it's about doing your job. How many extra sessions have we had in the last recent years? And it's frustrating because we have legislators calling people out for not doing their job. It seems pretty hypocritical. So
you went right through my questions.
Oh.
That's fine.
Well, we can come back and I can expound.
No, that's all right. I was going to ask you to be specific about public safety. You were. You explained what the leadership meant to you, and
it's for me, in one final aspect, it's about doing the right thing.
Right.
Not the popular thing, not the political survival thing. It's about doing the right thing. And I think if you do the right thing, people will see that and they support you. If you can justify your actions, people understand. People are smart. Give them credit.
Well, Craig, the last question I have on my sheet here. Growth Management Act.
Yeah.
In your opinion, has it worked?
I think it's had some successes, but I think if you're to look at it as a whole, no. I don't think it really came to the solution it was looking for. A lot of that is because the Growth Management Act, for the most part, in the way we see it now, was created in 1990. Our state looks vastly different today in 2016 than it does in 1990. And yet, which is, I think it's pretty common within the high levels of government, is once you pass something, you kind of just leave it alone and let it, and you don't make, as situations change and the environment changes, you don't go back and tweak it, to maybe more fit the current situation. And I think for the Growth Management Act, that's been the biggest thing. It hasn't eliminated the little islands that we have. I mean, a perfect example of that is in the city of Bremerton. You have Navy Yard City, Rocky Point, which are completely surrounded by the city, yet the little pockets of unincorporated county. And that's not just exclusive to Bremerton. It is all over. So what you have there is you still created an attraction for cities who want to annex to basically gobble up the high taxation of the commercial properties and leave the residential properties to county services. And it also allowed growth management areas that either were never really intended to or haven't in a time frame become a city entity. We look at Belfair as being an example of that, having its own urban growth area. We have Allen has its own urban growth area. Up in Kitsap County, we've seen it with the central Kitsap. It's not in our district, but the central Kitsap urban growth area, which butts up to the city of Bremerton, and it's created issues there. And down in Thurston County, we have the Rochester Grand Mound area. So what we've done is we've saddled county governments with providing city level services, and they weren't intended to do that. And so we come into issues in Silverdale. It's the prime example. I can't believe I was almost going to not say that one. So you get to this point where all of this commercial growth has happened in a county area. It is now requiring urban level services, city level services, and the counties, they get tax money for that. But yet when these entities start looking at incorporating, or how can we serve this area better, the counties put themselves in a lot of trouble because all of a sudden we still have to provide these services to the rest of the county. The Belfair sewer is a really good example of those. And I don't want to say failures because I don't think it's ever a failure, but it's those weaknesses that get exposed. And now, we have an issue where we have a sewer in Belfair. It's not under its own jurisdiction. It's the county's responsibility. And I hear folks saying, well, why am I paying for the sewer in Belfair? I don't live in Belfair. Well, but you are a county resident, and the county has responsibility for that. So I can see both sides of that, and we need to find really good solutions for those. And I really believe that the state maybe has a role in saying, hey, let's give very general definitions of what we'd like to see. This is what we vision. But give that control to the local areas. The citizens who live in those areas have to live with those decisions. And whether it's through the county governments and the cities cooperatively working together to decide, this is where we see our growth going. This is where we need to identify and how we work together to do that. And if that involves what I like, a little analogy I like to say is taking the Letterman jackets off. Yeah. And working together and realizing where we can share resources and where entities can provide their own services. It's a lot less kingdom building, which in our state's history we have a pretty good record of kingdom building, and really putting this on the local control and doing it right. And it's not a popular subject, especially within the Democratic Party. I understand that, and I'd probably be ostracized for it, but to me that's being realistic about the situation that we're in, and how we fix these issues is we have to make hard choices. We have to open up these acts that we made, these laws that we've made, and make them work to today and not 20 years from now, and make decisions based off the realities today. So yeah.
Okay, Craig. That's all that I had on my sheet.
Okay.
I do like to give people a chance to talk about anything that wasn't covered. If you have something else that's...
No, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Like I said, being a lifelong resident of this district, and having the exposure to the different areas, I don't believe there's been a legislator or even a candidate in the history of this district that brings that background that I do. Having been here, I understand where we're at because I've seen where we've come from, and I think that's something that it's not a knock on the incumbent. Just he hasn't lived here but 10 years, other than a stint in the military. So understanding our history beyond that 10 years, when we talked about some of his issues that he's talked about with transportation reform, DOT reform. I'm not going to defend DOT. There's several things that they could do better. But understanding that when we go from funding, I remember my father spending $600 a year on car tabs when we had the motor vehicle excise tax. And we go to $30 car tabs. Well, we never made a stable way to make up that funding. And honestly, how, in relation to that, things are pretty good considering those. There's always improvements to be made. But we've had our reform on some of these things. It's just you weren't here for it. So when we say, well, it's not working, well, these are the reasons why we're not working. We have to go back and look at where we've come from. Do this. Another issue with school fundings has been on is the levies and fire districts, especially with public safety, is the property tax initiatives limiting to 1%. We saw during the recession that was really tough for these districts to provide services under this cap, understanding costs are going up, tax rules are going down. So we need to find real solutions to those. And 6%, I believe, was way too high. But making a 5% cut, and then having these districts, basically the taxing districts, go back to the voters every few years to have to say, hey, we need a bump up, Those elections cost a lot of money, and that's a lot of money that could be used for mission critical functions, I believe. So understanding that background, I believe, is also a benefit. And I love this area. I've been here my whole life. I intend to stay here my whole life, raising my kids here, and this is another opportunity for me to serve.
Okay. Craig, thanks for taking some time. Craig Patti, a Democrat for 35th District State Representative position.
All right, thank you.
Helping voters make informed decisions. This is Hood Canal Communications and MasonWebTV.com.